This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Libyan Eastern-based forces commander Haftar announces conditional lifting of an oil blockade. UN chief calls for political will to help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And African countries sign up to the WHO's fair distribution of vaccines plan. Hello and a very warm welcome to you wherever you're joining us. This is Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Mahia Mutua in Nairobi. Also coming up, in business, South Africa pledges to continue funding its ailing national airline. And in sports, the Kenyan government rolls out a phased return of post-COVID-19 sporting activities in the country. We begin the hour in Nigeria, where over 30 people are feared dead after a bus plunged into a river near a bridge in Ebonyi State along Akaeze-Ishiagu Highway. Reports indicate that the bus was ferrying passengers from a burial ceremony in Ebonyi State at the time of the incident. The driver of the bus is said to have lost control of the vehicle, which veered into the river, submerging immediately. According to Ebonyi State's police spokesman, about 5 people have so far been rescued from the river. Well, for more on that story, CGTN's Deji Badmus joins us on the line for the latest. Deji, what more can you tell us at this hour about the incident?
Well, Mahia, just as you've been reporting, the accident actually happened in Ebonyi, and it happened on a bridge, actually. The driver was actually, according to the police, the driver was actually trying to overtake a lorry just on the bridge when he lost control, and he was actually carrying 36 passengers, a fairly big bus, and the bus plunged into the river. And well, at the moment, rescue operation is still going on. The police says it has rescued more persons, but most of them are in critical conditions. But that the majority of the passengers on the bus now are suspected to still be trapped in the bus and under the water. So rescue operation is currently going on, and people are beginning to lose hope that they're going to find anyone alive, because this happened since yesterday, but the rescue is still going on.
All right, Deji, thank you very much for that. CGTN's Deji Badmus joining us from Lagos there. We do apologize for the quality of the line. We head to Libya now, where the commander of one of the key warring factions, Khalifa Haftar, says his forces will let oil production resume after an 8-month blockade. A senior politician in Tripoli also says a committee will be formed to ensure fair distribution of revenue from oil and gas sales. However, Libya's National Oil Corporation, which operates Libya's oil facilities, says it will not lift the force majeure on exports until Haftar's forces have been withdrawn from oil facilities. The Tripoli-based Central Bank of Libya revealed that the blockade by Haftar's eastern forces has cost Libya $9 billion in lost revenue so far in 2020. The stoppage has become a big obstacle to new efforts to seek a path forward in peace talks after Haftar's assault on Tripoli fell apart in June.
I announced the resumption of production and export of oil, with all requirements and necessary procedures to guarantee a fair distribution of oil revenues and to make sure they're not used to support terrorism or put at risk of theft. These are guarantees to resume production and exports. We're keen to do this with the aim of improving the living conditions of our citizens.
Right now, CGTN's Adel Mahroui joins us from Cairo to discuss this further. Adel, how important is the resumption of Libya's oil production after an 8-month blockade?
Well, Maya, as you've mentioned, the oil resources are quite lucrative. You said that there has been a 9 billion effect in 2020, and overall, Libya's oil revenue, which forms about 95% of the country's revenues in general, comes from oil. That's about $20 billion. So when having this revenues stopping for months without any hope for the production to resume, this puts huge effort, huge pressure over the government and the services that the people receive. That's why actually we've been seeing in the recent weeks popular movements of protests in both sides, the eastern and western blocs, as people have been suffering from the lack of power, the lack of health services and other government services, and they have bursted in anger because they cannot sustain that anymore. And the key point for that was basically after the LNA forces have been using their control over the oil fields as a political pressure to divert or to gain more power in the talks that were ongoing, or at least in the fighting that was ongoing between both the LNA forces and the government national accord from the other side. So having the oil coming back in terms of production and its revenues to fuel the finances for the government, that's a great relief for the people, for Libya.
And looking back, how have these recent events in Libya contributed to Haftar's announcement of oil production resumption there?
Well, and we've seen negotiations going on, Mahia, in Switzerland, in Morocco, and both of them, according to the United Nations and the Moroccan Foreign Ministry, have reached great consensus and great achievement in terms of planning out some of the details needed to regulate the next 18 months, or at least an 18 months plan for a transition in Libya, through which within the most, after a year and a half at the most, general elections will be held. And Libyans have agreed on how to appoint key positions in the transitional government and in transitional institutions, among them the National Oil Corporation, which has been divided as the rest of the country. And this political progress has been gained to pave the way for, has been made to pave the way for new leadership to rise in Libya, people that have consensus among the people, not controversial characters like Haftar or Faiz al-Sarraj or other politicians who are known for their political tendencies to support their own factions rather than the whole interest of the Libyan factions. And therefore, this has been quite a political pressure for Haftar to show flexibility so as not to keep standing still while the world has been reporting positive progress coming out from Libya. And I think this has been one of the driving forces for Haftar to reconsider. Also, the United States has been playing a lot of political influence with Khalifa Haftar. It's the US embassy that has announced that Haftar will be lifting the restrictions over the oil ports, and after that Haftar came to confirm that in September he will be doing so.
And finally, Adel, why is the Turkish president now disappointed with the announcement by Libya's internationally recognized Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj effectively wanting to quit next month?
So Faiz al-Sarraj, because of the political progress I've just mentioned, has taken the initiative to say that he is willing to step aside and hand over power to a new presidential council and a new transitional cabinet. It is a great political move from Faiz al-Sarraj, who is putting more trust on the ongoing negotiations and saying that his presence will not be the reason to push these talks to failure. And Turkey is disappointed mainly because they have invested a lot in Faiz al-Sarraj. He has been a strong ally to President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Together they have signed agreements, defense agreements and military agreements for Turkey to defend and support the GNA forces, Faiz al-Sarraj's led government. Together they have been dividing or drawing the economic zones in the Mediterranean Sea, something that Turkey has been significantly relying on to counter the coalition that Egypt, Greece, and Cyprus have been leading in the East Mediterranean Sea. So seeing all of these investments and the military support it has sent behind that man, and now that man is maybe, as he said, is thinking seriously about stepping down. It's a political waste to Turkey, of course, and that's one of the main reasons. Also, there are fears that when Faiz al-Sarraj is out of the picture, the Western factions, tribes and militias will be divided, because already they are not quite along in their political or in their relations. They're not quite united, and it's Faiz al-Sarraj who has more or less been maintaining to do so. So his absence may have also a negative impact on the power that the Western forces have been enjoying throughout the past few years.
All right, Adel, thank you very much for that. CGTN's Adel Mahroui joining us live there from Cairo. Moving on, the 75th Annual Sustainable Development Goals Conference is kicked off virtually. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is calling for more urgent measures to eradicate poverty. As CGTN's Daniel Arap Moy reports, the emergence of the coronavirus is creating the need for implementation of most of the developmental goals.
The annual Sustainable Development Summit is happening at a time when the world is grappling with the coronavirus pandemic. It is a situation that has exposed the wide gaps between poor and rich nations. It is fact that the UN Secretary General acknowledges.
The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is designed to address the very fragilities and shortcomings that the pandemic has exposed. And at its heart, there is a simple promise: to end poverty and to leave no one behind. Indeed, the poor have a special claim on our efforts and energies.
Tackling poverty is just but one of the key targets. Others are striking gender balance that has been tilted against women in Africa and other developing countries. Tackling climate change is also key in the realization of the development goals.
The science is clear. The people are clear. There is no time to procrastinate. The decisions taken over the next few months and years will have enormous impact on where we will be by 2030. 3 areas are particularly crucial: finance, COVID-19 recovery, and ambition.
Guterres said the communities that are in need of help are those that are also hard to access, and transition to green and cleaner options could be key in the creating jobs and sustainable livelihoods. Avoiding future pandemics like the coronavirus could also be a top agenda.
We need ambition and solidarity to provide the $35 billion extra needed so that COVID-19 vaccines and treatments are available to everyone fast. Ambition to cut carbon emissions by half in the next decade, paving the way to carbon neutrality by 2050. And ambition to protect biodiversity, achieve gender equality, end poverty and hunger, and fulfill the promise of the Sustainable Development Goals.
It has been 5 years since the 2013 agenda was adopted. Although the Sustainable Development Goals seem to be in the horizon for most developed nations, struggling economies, such as those in Africa, are still in the woods. Improvement of maternal and child health, together with access to electricity and education, are some of the challenges faced. Climate change is feeding into a more complex situation in Africa. This is the rise of food shortages. Conflicts are rising as terrorist groups take advantage of the situation to entrench themselves by exploiting ethnic and religious differences. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN.
Let's head to Uganda now, where the United Nations and the government say that the country has increased its forest cover from 9 to 12%. This is the result of collaborative efforts between stakeholders, including the public, government and non-governmental organizations. And as countries prepare for a major climate summit set to take place in New York next week, Wanja Mungai tells us more about Uganda's success story in boosting its forest cover.
Mpanga Forest Reserve in central Uganda has lush vegetation and a dense forest cover. The tropical forest is a symbol of pride for conservationists.
We know that we have one of the best mahoganies in the world, in the forests that we have around here. There has been a recent wave on Afzelia africana, which was being extracted from the northern and and the northern part of the country, and then the Tectona Grandes.
However, most of its surface area had been lost to farmers in the neighboring communities seeking farmland and firewood. 52-year-old Muhammad Kategera is a father of 12, and this part of the forest is his lifeline.
If only the prices of electricity would be reduced, we could afford to cook with electricity. What makes us destroy these forests is because we cannot afford to cook with electricity. I have electricity at my home, but we do not use it much because it is expensive. Unless electricity is made affordable for us, forests will remain our source of energy for cooking. We do not have an alternative.
Human activities like these led to a depletion of the forest cover, not just here in Mpingi, but in other parts of the country. The government reported a drop in the forest cover nationwide from 24% to 9% between 1990 and year 2015. But an initiative by the National Forestry Authority is now ensuring a recovery through reforestation and working alongside communities.
We've gone an extra mile to engage communities whom we call stakeholders that are living adjacent to these forest reserves and organize them into what we call collaborative forest management groups and are participating in the management of these forests. They are deriving benefits in a much more sustainable way and in an organized way.
The efforts are part of the United Nations Climate Action Goal. Trees, according to the United Nations Environmental Programme, act as carbon sinks. By absorbing carbons in the atmosphere, they eventually reduce global warming that causes climate change. Effects of climate change in this part of Africa can be seen through extreme weather and unpredictable rainfall, which affect agriculture.
We are still a rain-fed agricultural economy. So if you don't have health forests that can help you form the needed rain to support agriculture, then you will have to invest heavily into the irrigation, which still would as well suffer. The other factor is that focusing on rehabilitating these forests would still support the energy sector. These forests are catchments for all these rivers and lakes, and that's where we are generating power from these rivers. So it is a very critical resource that must be focused on critically and therefore supported so that other dependent sectors can also flourish.
The government of Uganda aims at going back to its once glorious past. It targets to double the forest cover to 24% by year 2040. And as the Climate Week begins on Monday in New York, the East African nation takes pride in embracing climate action by planting one tree at a time. Wanja Mungai, CGTN.
On to Ethiopia now, where the health minister says the country can hold its general election soon, despite the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. The minister has announced that the polls that had been postponed due to the pandemic can be conducted under strict health regulations. Here is CGTN's Girum Chala with the details.
Addressing MPs in the Ethiopian parliament, Health Minister Leah Tadessa said that following the latest assessments made and considering the capacity that the country has developed in the fight against the coronavirus, it is now possible to hold the general elections. A few months ago, the Ethiopian Electoral Board postponed the elections indefinitely due to the COVID-19 outbreak. It said the polls would be held when conditions improved. Well, it looks like that time is fast approaching. And the health minister said the 6 Ethiopian general elections can be held as a public awareness about the virus has also increased. She said there has been increased usage of face masks in public across the country, and Ethiopia is now even able to deliver test kits locally. All these, she said, have created favorable conditions for the polls. However, the Ministry of Health suggests there must be preconditions to be fulfilled before and during the elections. One is the development of election guidelines that can take the COVID-19 pandemic into consideration. It's now up to the country's electoral board, the government and contending parties to decide the next step. Grumjara CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, let's shift our focus to the United States, where Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg has died of cancer at the age of 87. She was the longest-serving woman on America's highest court and one of the court's most liberal justices. Ginsburg's death has sent shockwaves throughout the Democratic Party. On Friday, mourners gathered in Washington to honor her legacy. CGTN's Giles Gibson looks back on her extraordinary life and career.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg rose from humble beginnings in Brooklyn, New York to the U.S. Supreme Court, becoming a feminist icon and picking up the nickname the Notorious RBG along the way.
What did you say your name was? Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Ginsburg's early years as a law student in the 1950s were dramatized in the Hollywood movie On the Basis of Sex. When she was nominated to the U.S. Supreme Court by President Bill Clinton in 1993, Ginsburg highlighted the scarcity of women in the legal profession in her early days.
My law school class in the late 1950s numbered over 500. That class included less than 10 women.
In the 1970s, Ginsburg led the Women's Rights Project at the American Civil Liberties Union, winning a series of landmark gender discrimination cases in the Supreme Court. Professor Paul Schiff Berman clerked for Justice Ginsburg in the late 1990s. He remembers Ginsburg being asked by a visiting Girl Scout if she'd always wanted to be a Supreme Court justice.
And she said, after a long pause, well, you have to understand that when I went to law school, the idea that I could even be a lawyer was far from certain. And I think she really enjoyed the fact that now there's a whole generation or multiple generations of little girls who can think, oh, I'd like to be a Supreme Court justice.
In her later years, Ginsburg battled through multiple bouts of cancer, her fans agonizing as they waited for updates on her health.
I, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, do solemnly swear.
Justice Ginsburg was the second woman to be appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. When asked when there would be enough women on the court's 9-member bench, she answered, when there are 9. Giles Gibson, CGTN, Washington.
Well, Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden expressed his sadness over the death of Ginsburg. He also said the winner of November's presidential election should pick her replacement.
But there is no doubt, let me be clear, that the voters should pick the president, and the president should pick the justice for the Senate to consider.
Well, President Donald Trump hailed the late justice as a titan of the law. At a White House event, he also announced a list of 20 potential justices, including 3 sitting senators. Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says the Senate will vote on a replacement even with the upcoming presidential election. But some law experts are worried Ginsburg's passing could dramatically alter the balance of the court. Stay with us here on Africa Live. It's time for us to take a short break. Here's what's coming up. African countries sign up to the WHO's fair distribution of vaccines plan. And home-based care for COVID-19 patients bears fruits in Kenya.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climate and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us on Africa Live. Now, African countries have all signed up to a joint global plan to help produce, buy and distribute COVID-19 vaccines fairly around the world. So far, 170 countries globally have beat the 18th September deadline set by the WHO to join the initiative. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi reports from Addis Ababa.
In August, the World Health Organization tabled the idea for a joint plan to set up mechanisms to enable countries to easily get access to a COVID-19 vaccine. It is called COVAX, and it aims to work with vaccine manufacturers to provide countries with equitable access to safe and effective vaccines once they are licensed and approved. The WHO wants $35 billion to make the plan a success. At least 8 countries in Africa have agreed to self-finance their vaccine doses through this COVAX initiative.
Some lower middle income countries, including Equatorial Guinea, Botswana, Gabon, Mauritius, Namibia, Seychelles, and South Africa. These are some of the countries that have agreed as part of this COVAX partnership to self-finance and therefore to manifest their interest in having access to the vaccines.
The WHO says the at least 170 countries that have signed up are considering 9 candidate vaccines and 9 others are under evaluation. The WHO aims to procure and deliver 2 billion doses of approved vaccines by the end of 2021. The Africa CDC, however, says countries should be aware that vaccines alone will not combat COVID-19.
And we also have to recognize that even if a vaccine was available today, the world has never in the history of infectious diseases been able to vaccinate 500 million people in 1 year. We don't have that number yet. So it's going to be a very challenging effort to roll this out, that we must work collectively, aggressively to strengthen the delivery systems there. So I say all of this to say that the vaccine is not going to be like a magic bullet where we get it today and COVID is over. I mean, it's going to take time.
The Africa CDC is encouraging countries to do more COVID-19 testing in the meantime. The Africa CDC is sending over 5 million test kits to different countries across the continent to help them increase the 13 million tests that have so far been conducted. It hopes the continent will have tested at least 20 million people by November. And it is now introducing antigen tests.
We will be working with partners to distribute an additional 2 million antigen tests. This is important because this is a new technology that we are introducing into the testing scenario. Previously, we were all limited with the ability to expand testing by polymerase chain reaction, which is a PCR test, a molecular test, which takes a very long, the turnaround time can be long. And now with the antigen test, will enable that you test people quickly, and within 30 minutes or so, we know the results and you can do the contact tracing. That is a very important development.
The continent has so far registered at least 1.3 million confirmed COVID-19 positive cases and has lost over 33,000 people to the pandemic. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
South Africa's move to level 1 COVID-19 regulations in the coming few days has largely been welcomed by businesses and people. International travel is back on the cards, but restrictions still apply on gatherings, sporting events and movement. CGTN's Julie Shire now reports.
Cooperative Governance Minister Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma reflected on how difficult and testing the last 6 months have been as South Africa battled the coronavirus.
It has changed our lives forever and probably reversed some of the economic and social gains that we have registered as a democratic South Africa.
It's back to business, especially for the tourism industry from the 1st of October.
International travel in the continent is allowed to all countries and from all countries. But other international travel, there would be a schedule of countries where the infections are high, who will not be allowed temporarily.
Government has softened restrictions around events. Up to 100 people are allowed at funerals. Religious and social gatherings are limited to moderate crowds.
Inside the venue, the maximum is 250 at 1.5 meters apart, or less if the venue is small. You cannot have more than 500 people outdoors. Whether it's a faith gathering, whether it's a social gathering, whether it's a whatever gathering.
The good news, however, is the curfew's been cut to 4 hours.
The curfew's moved out, so it's much easier for people to stay out a bit later. In Cape Town, that's very important because it's light till very late and people enjoy al fresco evenings and dinners and drinks on the street.
While nightclubs and cruise ships remain banned, most South Africans will be back at work.
It's been quite difficult this whole year, actually. And I think most South Africans is happy that we're moving to level 1, especially when it comes to unemployment in South Africa. It's been tough on many people. Small businesses have been closing down. So it's really been difficult.
There's so many people that lost their livelihoods as a result of this. I mean, hospitality, I know quite a few people that are still actually struggling to make ends meet. And I mean, you know, selling your stuff just to put food on the table, it's not the best thing.
South Africans have been waiting a long time for level 1, and from the people we spoke to, returning to some sort of normalcy is a relief. Julie Shire, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Let's turn to Kenya, where home-based care for asymptomatic COVID-19 cases has been described by the government as a success. But just what is it that people have been doing right to ensure this type of care makes a difference? CGTN's Robert Nagila talked to a Kenyan woman who recovered from the virus after home-based care and brings us her story.
At her B&B business in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, owner Geritich says back on her feet after testing positive for COVID-19 2 months ago. After experiencing symptoms, she isolated herself for a week before taking a COVID-19 test, which came back positive. After consultations with her doctor,
we said, let's go into home-based care because my symptoms, although quite severe, did not involve that loss of oxygen.
Geritich says her family played a key role in her journey to recovery. Guidelines issued by the Ministry of Health allow family members to act as caregivers alongside community health workers. Geritich's symptoms persisted for 3 weeks.
Second test came back positive. And so when I spoke with my doctors, they said it's entirely the case that you're still symptomatic, you're still coughing, you're not completely unwell. So you're one of those unfortunate cases where it's just lingered.
She admits it wasn't easy on her mental health.
I remember often not being sure whether I was awake or asleep or even alive or dead, so that anxiety kicks in.
The home-based care system was introduced in June to relieve pressure from the health system after a rise in asymptomatic cases. At the time, at least 78% of those who tested positive for COVID-19 were asymptomatic cases.
One of the things we realize is that when you're within your home environment, it is much easier for you to recover much faster. You receive much more personalized care. You receive much more nutritious supplementation in terms of feeding. And as well, you receive the love and care that you receive from a family.
Now fully recovered, Geritich says, contrary to what many think, home-based care is expensive, but she would much rather recover at home than in a hospital.
My recovery at home was a lot easier than it would have been if I was in hospital. As I mentioned, I kept testing positive. Imagine what that would have meant for my mental health if I was in hospital.
Robert McGinnis, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
The British government is considering more restrictions in parts of England to try and slow a surge in COVID-19 cases. Pubs and restaurants could be forced to close, but schools and most workplaces would remain open. Yolo Opdavid has more.
The last line of defence is full national action, and I don't want to see that, but we will do whatever is necessary.
A warning for many that the UK government is considering wider and deeper restrictions throughout England. Regions in Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland have also seen a rise in COVID infections. The timing is still to be decided. Meetings have included Dido Harding, who leads the virus test and trace scheme for the government, and senior ministers have been briefed by England's Chief Medical Officer and Chief Scientist. A 2-week lockdown could be implemented in late October.
The virus is clearly accelerating across the country. We've got to take the necessary action to keep people safe. The number of people in hospital is doubling every 8 days or so. And so you saw the action that I took yesterday across the northeast. We will do what it takes to keep people safe.
Meanwhile, the testing regime is under strain. Workers and relatives of people showing COVID symptoms are finding it difficult to be tested.
It's an absolute joke. I've had to bring my 3 kids out of school. They're now missing out on a vital education because of this COVID-19, and there's not one person turned up onto this site. Now,
we've been telephoning, doing everything. This is the 3rd day we're trying to get a test, and there isn't a test. And what I think the noble thing to do would be, don't tell people rubbish. Tell them there is no testing center because the labs are full up.
As feared, lockdown easing has led to a spike in infections, and the concern is it could reach the same levels as March and April. The government has been warned the virus is doubling in numbers every 7 or 8 days. Experts believe the UK is roughly 6 weeks behind France and Spain, where infections have surged. They warn Britain is in danger of a significant increase without tougher measures. Yolo Abdavid, CGTN, London.
Well, it's just about time for us to check in on all the day's business. Here's what's coming up. South Africa pledges to continue funding ailing national airline. And Nigeria's inflation spikes after slowed economic activity.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Onto the business. South African Airways' business rescue practitioners have received a letter from the government indicating its commitment to fund the ailing state-owned airline. The notification came ahead of a creditors' meeting called to review the SAA business rescue plan. This after the money needed to fund the plan was not secured. The letter, however, outlines that the mechanisms and the timelines are yet to be finalized. The business rescue practitioners are keen to engage the government in detail to get a clear understanding of the timelines and the flow of funds into the company. The practitioners will communicate with all parties next week after meeting the government to discuss funding plans. The SAA Cabin Crew Association and the National Union of Metal Workers boycotted the creditors' meeting. They sent a letter to inform the government of their intention to legally challenge the liquidation of the ailing airline.
We are confident we're going to get what we want. We will not relent until we get what we want. I think the DPE has made us promises. They've made 3,000 people take packages. And the least they can do is give them what they promised and pay them their money. We'll march every week if we have to. We'll march the DPE. We'll march the ANC that has put together a government that has failed us as people of South Africa.
On to Nigeria, where the country's inflation has spiked to a 29-month high after slowed economic activity due to the COVID-19 lockdown and disruption in supply chains led to higher food prices. A steep drop in oil prices and the subsequent plunge in forex earnings has further complicated the government's efforts to revive the ailing economy. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam now reports.
The latest Consumer Price Index report released by the National Bureau of Statistics indicates that Nigerians are writhing in hardship as inflation surges. Inflation rose to 13.22% from 12.82% recorded in July, the highest in over 2 years. Prices of food and other essential commodities are on a steady rise, leaving the majority of citizens in economic turmoil.
Even the way we feed, we have to be careful because the price of especially food commodities has gone up. Gari that we used to buy 200 naira is now 350 naira. If you take 10,000 naira to the market, you can't come back with anything meaningful. And for the fact that we are not getting anything commensurate to what is happening, commensurate to the fact that the price of things has gone up, like if you are being paid, if you are receiving salary, they have not increased your salary. So how, it's an irony. It's an irony.
Various government efforts to reduce the impact of COVID-19 on the economy is being threatened. This recent inflation was driven by increased passenger transport, medical services, and pharmaceutical products. Among other unfavorable government policies, it's worsened by the recent hike in prices of essentials like fuel and electricity tariffs.
If you look at it, it's just the government's policy that is causing this thing. So it is man-made, basically. It is not a natural disaster. When this administration came into power, what did they do? They banned importation of raw without creating refineries existing or making existing refineries work. They came up with banning importation of food such as rice, tomatoes, tomato paste and the rest, when we don't even have the power to meet up to the local demands that we have.
The central bank in a recent report painted a gloomy picture that inflation could exceed 14% by December 2020. The report named budget deficit, rising unemployment, and the impact of COVID-19 lockdown as factors that might truncate government's intervention efforts. And economic watchers warn that Nigerians may need to brace up for tougher days ahead. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Ethiopia's transport minister has commended the successful construction and operation of the Ethiopia-Djibouti standard gauge railway. The electrified rail line is the first transboundary railway on the African continent. CGTN's Astatal has the details.
The 756-kilometer electrified railway is the first transboundary railway on the African continent. It connects Ethiopia's capital Addis Ababa to the Red Sea port in Djibouti. Contracted to 2 Chinese companies, the Ethio-Djibouti electrified railway has been playing an increasingly important role in facilitating the transportation of people and goods between the 2 countries.
Together, we accomplished a very significant task of construction of about 756 kilometers of railway line with major relevant infrastructure, rolling stocks and facilities, and the system was made open to operation since January 2018.
The Ethio-Djibouti electrified railway has already cut the transport time for goods from 7 days to less than 20 hours. It has also reduced the cost by at least 1/3 since commencing operations nearly 2 years ago. Presently, it provides different kinds of freight services, including the transport of perishable goods, vehicles, cereals, and fertilizers.
There are 13 countries in the world with a population size larger than 100 million. And you might have noticed that Ethiopia is the only one with no coastline and seaport. This is the major bottleneck for the development of Ethiopia. And 95% of the trade of Ethiopia goes through Djibouti.
Djibouti is important to landlocked Ethiopia, which currently imports and exports nearly 90% of its goods through its ports. For Ethiopia, the dream is that one day this railway will extend from Djibouti's coast all the way across Africa to the Atlantic Ocean. Astatal, CGTN.
Major restrictions on several Chinese apps in the United States go into effect on Sunday. Starting at midnight, TikTok and WeChat will no longer be available for download. But one other deadline did get an extension, as CGTN's White House correspondent Nathan King now explains.
This is a classic case of don't listen to the headlines, look at the detail. Reality over rhetoric. Now, while the headlines are all saying that these apps are now banned in the US, that is not true. You will not be allowed to download from US app stores like Apple and Google, WeChat or TikTok as of midnight on Sunday here, local time, or updates either, but they are not banned. And when it comes to TikTok, if you look at the Commerce Department, they are allowing it to basically continue until November 12th after the election to come to some sort of deal. As we know, Oracle, Microsoft and Walmart and others have been interested, and that basically could come to fruition very soon, according to the US president.
We have some great options, and maybe we can keep a lot of people happy, but have the security that we need. We have to have the total security from China. We're not going to do anything to jeopardize security. At the same time, it's an amazing company and very, very popular. So if we can do a combination of both, I'd be very happy doing that. Could go very quickly, though. Could go very, very fast.
And, you know, these national security concerns have not yet been proven. And when it comes to WeChat, this is really interesting indeed, because essentially they're stopping downloads of WeChat. There may be some problems with financial transactions. VPNs are encouraged, as well as other methods of getting around it. There are no fines, by the way, or prosecutions planned. And WeChat users in China from the US, like companies, are allowed to continue, which suggests why, if it's a national security threat, why would that continue? And back to TikTok. Essentially what TikTok is saying is, look, this is a real definable moment. And the interim CEO of TikTok wrote this on another platform, Twitter. Let me just read. We agree that this type of ban would be bad for the industry. We invite Facebook and Instagram to publicly join our challenge and support our litigation. This is a moment to put aside our competition and focus on core principles like freedom of expression and due process of law. Now, you'd think that obviously Facebook would jump up and join TikTok and say, look, the internet is global. However, Facebook, as you know, is launching a rival product to TikTok, just as TikTok is coming under more and more scrutiny from the US government. It's incredible that we are here, considering the global reach of some of these apps, but this is where we are. Nathan King, CGTN, at the White House.
Well, it's just about time for the sports here on Africa Live. Here's what's coming up. The Kenyan government rolls out a phased return of post-COVID-19 sporting activities in the country.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? sports scene. Find your game.
Welcome back. Now, the Kenyan government has rolled out a plan for the phased return of sporting activities. However, all under 18 sports as well as contact games such as football, rugby and water sports